Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born in Somalia in 1969. She escaped fundamentalist Islam and an arranged marriage, finding asylum in the Netherlands in 1992. After 9/11, she turned decisively against the Islam of her upbringing and became a leading voice in the new atheism, decrying religion.
It's a form of madness.
I do regard Ayaan Hirsi Ali as personally heroic.
That's why it shocked everyone when last year she appeared on stage at the ARC conference with Jordan Peterson, John Anderson, and Os Guinness. First, she said that the West is Christian.
It's rooted in the Judeo-Christian traditions.
Then she said that she is Christian.
I am proudly of the Judeo-Christian religion.
But what did this mean? Richard Dawkins had his doubts.
Seriously, Ayaan, you are Christian?
He saw it as a cultural Christianity adopted for political reasons.
I think for her, Christianity is a bastion against something worse.
But there was evidence that something deeper was going on. For Ayaan, our cultural values have been the fruit of a spiritual movement.
The Enlightenment is a child of these Judeo-Christian traditions.
A true history of the West shows faith at the heart, not politics.
Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, I think has done a very detailed historical background.
But even more personally, Ayaan has spoken about a heartfelt conversion.
I went through a period of crisis. Nothing helped. And then I think it was one therapist who said to me, I think, Ayaan, you're spiritually bankrupt.
She went into more detail in a dialogue with Richard Dawkins held in May.
Having reached a place where I had absolutely nothing to lose, I prayed desperately. I felt like I had died and I was reborn.
Her personal testimony made a believer out of Dawkins. He now believes that Ayaan believes.
I came here prepared to persuade you, Ayaan, you're not a Christian. I think you are a Christian. Yeah. And I think Christianity is nonsense.
In this interview, I talked to Ayaan about Richard Dawkins.
So I love Richard. I admire Richard.
We talk of the new atheism.
The biggest mistake we made was to equate Islam with Christianity.
We talk about her conversion.
My spiritual awakening was preceded by suffering.
We speak of going to church and what she's learning.
Now I'm getting more and more of it and finding it very beautiful and peaceful and rewarding.
We talk about the failures of atheism and of Islam and the fundamentally different vision for life which Jesus Christ gives.
Sent his own son and sacrificed, and that's the expression of his love and the extent of his love. It's boundless and it's limitless.
This is Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus, including the meaning crisis. Please like this video and subscribe for more of this content. But here is my interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, your story has involved you leaving or entering perhaps the three religions that care most about people leaving or entering them. There's been Christianity, Islam, and the new atheism. You now describe yourself as a lapsed atheist. What does that mean?
And I don't think atheists would think of themselves as religious.
Oh, I did that very deliberately, yeah.
Yes, even though, yes, they do display some religious characteristics. Why do I call myself a lapsed Christian? It's obvious why I am a lapsed Muslim. Mm-hmm. Lapsed atheist is, I think atheism wasn't enough. And I think at the core of atheism is a negative. It's just the statement that I don't see any evidence of God, therefore I don't believe. But atheism doesn't offer a system. It doesn't offer a framework for the good life, except a call to exercise your reason. Mm. And I think in doing this, there is a childishness there in the assumption that human beings are, reasonable, and that if you just simply shed superstition or God or faith in anything invisible for which you can't present falsifiable or verifiable evidence, then human beings will just be wonderful, enlightened, wise, and they'll be led by their reason. And now I think we can see all around us that the exact opposite is happening. We haven't had in human history as much knowledge at our fingertips as we do now, as much science. We've never been more open to reason. We've never been more prosperous. And yet the people in the ivory towers of the world's greatest universities and centers of science and learning are displaying some of the most irrational behaviors of all time. I mean, just the proposition that there are multiple genders, that sort of thing. This isn't being said just by teenagers who want to provoke society or people with gender dysphoria. This is being said in the centers of science. You know, there are communities within the world of science who are actually trying to, they're doing it. They're operating on young children and transitioning them from male to female or from female to male. So this is how irrational we've become.
So a couple of pushbacks that Richard Dawkins had at the Dissident Dialogues where you discussed with him. It was very cordial, it was very respectful, full of love, began with a hug, ended with a hug. You were very personal on stage, and I loved your little sort of shrug at the end. You sort of told your story to Richard, and here I am. You know? And it was a wonderfully cordial dialogue. I think two pushbacks that Richard, I can discern from Richard on that point was, one was, well, if atheism doesn't provide these existential answers, so what?
Yes.
Was sort of one sort of response. And then the other response was a belief that enlightened, secular, rational philosophy will get us to the place where we can answer some of those questions. How would you respond to that?
Well, the affection, first of all, is real. We are friends. I love Richard. I admire Richard. And so I think for me, it's amazing that you can see the world completely differently, or you can change your minds without then saying, well, now I've changed my mind about things. Now I don't like you anymore. You're not my friend anymore. That is also some of the stuff that we are seeing around, which is a terrible development. But no, I love Richard, but I disagree with him, and I see things differently now. And I think on that stage it was clear that Richard's expectation was, and I quoted Bertrand Russell. When Bertrand Russell wrote that essay, he ends with, if we shed Christianity, he wrote an essay called Why I Am Not a Christian. And so if we cast Christianity aside, what's going to come in its place is going to be reason and enlightenment and knowledge and so on and so forth. And that doesn't happen. And I think Richard, being intellectually honest, is very much aware of this phenomenon now, where we were in New York and the protests in Columbia University were going on at NYU and Harvard and Yale. Look, these are the temples of science and reason and enlightenment. And if they are churning out young people who can't tell the difference between right and wrong, who are displaying the most irrational behaviors, then I think that sends Richard and people like Richard back to rethink what is it that we're doing wrong? What is it that we're not getting about human nature? About human nature,
I think that is probably the fatal flaw in the new atheism. As a Christian, I think they get God wrong, obviously, but I think they get human nature wrong as well, that we are not these sort of rational individuals coolly, calmly collating the data and coming up with theories. And actually, I wonder whether the kind of new atheism that's really it's a rebrand of logical positivism from 100 years ago, around the time of Bertrand Russell, that they would make claims like the only kind of truth is scientific truth, which is a self-refuting statement, because it is itself not a scientific statement. So it's, if it's true, it's false, and if it's false, it's true. So I think it's self-refuting in itself, but it also doesn't take account of what a human person really is and what a human person really needs.
So my take on that is the positivism of 100 years ago and the reaction to it by Christians and people of faith. Those conversations happened. And they happened in the West, and I think they were put to rest. And at least we had reached a place of, all right, let's agree to disagree, to each his own. But if you walk into any modern library, if you walked into a library before 2020, you would still find either ends of the library, the faith end of the library, the science end of the library, filled with all the work. I think those things were settled. And then in comes Islam. And back in the day, and this is when I got in with my atheist friends, this is how I met my atheist friends, it was a reaction from the atheist corner to Islam and to the irrationality that Islam was displaying that they thought had been put to sleep. And I think part of what happened is they wanted to compose the criticism, which is really a replay in some cases of the criticism against Christianity a few hundred years ago. But now it is against Islam, a religion that belongs to a minority. And you know what? In the 1930s and the 1940s, there was another minority, a Jewish minority, that we had sent to the gas chambers. And so there's this delicate interplay of we do want to criticize the religion of the new minority, but how do we do it without offending or without inciting hatred against them amongst the population? Why don't we start with criticizing Christianity, equating Christianity to Islam? I think that's the background of it. I don't think that the two, Christianity and Islam, are the same to begin with. But that explains the, in my view, the rise of new atheism. New atheism wasn't a rise against Christianity.
To what degree was 9/11 behind the new atheism?
I think it is, yeah, it was a reaction to 9/11.
Yes.
And it is, in some ways, I find the new atheists, and they were better than many other communities in looking at Muslims and looking at them as individuals endowed with reason, and trying to appeal to them and saying, here are the ridiculous things about your religion. So in that sense, I think they were actually heroic. They were doing things that other members of society were not doing. They were condescending. I remember being very critical of these so-called interfaith dialogues, where the dialogue wasn't a dialogue, it was a one-way dialogue. And the Christian side and the Jewish side, the rabbis and the bishops and the pastors, were really afraid of touching on the sensitive things, whereas the atheists were not doing that. Christopher Hitchens was really spelling out what was wrong with Islam, why it was not credible, why it was violent, and if you're a good person and a Muslim, these are the things that you needed to change. And I admired that. Yes. I still admire it.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we also, back in the day, I think the biggest mistake, I don't know to what degree it was deliberate, but the biggest mistake we made was to equate Islam with Christianity.
Yes. Mm. Is there an alternative universe in which 9/11 did not happen and Ayaan Hirsi Ali is in the Netherlands, and in a sense, I'm imagining that growing up within a Muslim framework, you pretty much saw the West as Christian to some degree, and you were encountering a very different kind of culture based on some very different values. You were encountering believing Christians who were working with the refugee communities and Christians who lived differently. Was there ever an alternative universe in which Ayaan doesn't have the atheist phase and goes from Muslim to Christian?
I think so. I think I probably was actually living the life of a Christian. My friends were Christians, and when I first went to the Netherlands, I was in an asylum seeker center, and some of the people who volunteered to come and work at the asylum seeker center were Christians. So I was very quickly acquainted with Christianity and fascinated by Western life without giving it the Christian identity. It's after I went to university and became friends with people who had shared their Christian faith that I led, quote unquote, a post-Christian life. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with you, I think, and this is hypothetical, if 9/11 had not happened, I would have continued to believe in God, because for me, faith in God was first challenged after 9/11. I was saying these things that, these 19 men, they acted in the name of Islam. And very quickly in my own thoughts, it was, well, so do I agree with them or not? And then you take that thinking to its logical conclusion, which is, do you then believe in God yourself? And so my reference point was the God of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad. but I believed in God. So if 9/11 had not happened, I think there is a scenario that is that you can think of where I might have, at a later age, come to acknowledge, Christianity and Jesus Christ as my savior, and it was all around me, and it is, like I said, I led the life of a Christian anyway. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess those sorts of years in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, in one sense, I think we weren't ready for Tom Holland's Dominion thesis yet. I think we were still sort of living off the fumes of we're at the end of history now, and and rationality has arrived, and Western liberal democracies are ascendant. I think if Dominion had been written 20 years earlier, I think we would have applauded it for its wonderful prose and thought it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I think when it's written in 2019, we start to read that thesis a little bit differently.
Yes.
When you first encountered Tom Holland and his work and the Dominion thesis, how was it striking you?
So I was looking for an explanation. I was frustrated by wokeism, and I was trying to understand it, and looking at different observers, different commentators on the subject, and that's how I encountered Tom Holland's work. He was explaining it, the woke as a perverted manifestation of a form of Christianity. And then I laid my hands on it, and I thought, the way you read Tom Holland, the way I read Tom Holland is not from cover to cover. But I started with that chapter on wokeism, and then started making my way through what ended up becoming an overview of 2,000 years of how Christianity influenced politics, philosophy, science, everything that we call Western civilization. And my conclusion is, I think, akin to his, which is Western civilization is a product of Christianity. And he shows that. And not only him, I think you and I have just touched on a number of other apologetics. And that then I wrote that article. This was, 8-9 months ago.
November 2023?
October, I think it was October, November. And I got feedback from everywhere, and suddenly this world of Christian apologetics came into my life.
Okay.
And I think it's wonderful. I think it's so enriching. I'd even like to share with my atheist friends and say, even if you don't agree with it, just, take a look.
Like what? What sort of things were striking
we all
you?
love, I'm now reading Nick Spencer. And he makes it more, Tom is a bit more scholarly. Nick makes it more of a sort of a talking point type of thing. It's a small book that brings together some of these key concepts that we all love, human dignity, the rule of law, even women's rights, and their origins in Christianity. Yeah. And so Tom's book and Nick's book and your book, I don't think it is convert to Christianity or else. Mm-hmm. It's just acknowledge the legacy itself. Yeah. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that legacy, even if you're going to rebel against it. Yes. You have to know what you're rebelling against. Yes. And I keep thinking it's not fair to younger people who have never been introduced to Christianity and who find themselves in a state where, because they're living in a Christian culture, they find this appeal, do something great with your life, fight for justice, fight against what's wrong. And they're doing all of these things, but they don't understand where it comes from. Right. And so it's a failure of the older generations who knew what they rebelled against to transmit, which is the only, I think, most important thing you do as a generation, is you leave the world literally a better place than you found it. So by not teaching the Bible, by eliminating Christianity, or attempting to eliminate Christianity out of cultural life, I think the older generations did a disservice to the younger generations. And that's really why it's easy for all of these crazy ideas to take root, and for these external predators, the Islamists and so on, to come in and seed these young, fertile minds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Tom Holland gives a very good explanation for why that has transpired. In a sense, Christianity has been too successful in that these faith positions about human dignity and equality and compassion have occurred to us nowadays as obvious and natural and universal, when they're nothing of the sort. They are the fruit of some very particularly Christian ideas. And so when Tom Holland says, you know, if you believe in human rights, you may as well believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and is seated at the right hand of the Father, he's not just saying you may as well believe one arbitrarily out there idea as believe this other arbitrarily out there idea. There is a profound link between why we believe in human rights and the fact that if Jesus is God, and if he's been raised from the dead to the highest place, then you could not have a higher, more exalted view for humanity. Humanity as such is exalted in the Christian story. And to the degree that we walk away from that Christian story, I'm just not sure how we can have humanism. I'm not sure how you can have that human dignity.
Exactly, or walk away from the most essential part of it. To say, I'm just going to run away with, and that takes me again to Os Guinness, the cut flower part of it. I'm just going to run away with what I like, you know, beautiful flower.
Right.
This beautiful concept of human dignity and freedom, and these institutions that I found, these are now mine. But you know, the origins, the roots of that, they're too murky and incomprehensible by the standards of today, and so I'm just going to throw that out. Yes. And I think that is part of the you know, the picture is this. What that does, if you cut that off, is you distort the picture. And we have this distorted civilization. It makes it easier to keep distorting it and disfiguring it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I loved about at the art conference where Os Guinness was on a panel and he said, we're in a cut flowers society, and you said, but we have seed packets.
Yes.
And I thought that was a wonderfully hopeful twist on the analogy. I've long, admired Os Guinness and have lived with that framework in my head. Yes, cut flower civilization. And I've thought, well, how do we graft a flower back in? But no, we sow the seed, which is a very biblical kind of idea. You know, the first parable Jesus tells is you sow the seed of the word of God.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating parable in Matthew chapter 13 where, to begin with, the birds are pecking at the seed because they're so much bigger than the seed. And then the seed grows into the mustard tree that is the biggest of all trees, so large that even the birds perch in its branches, which I think is a fascinating image that those forces that were against the Word of God end up enfolded within something that the Word of God has kind of grown. And I think one thing that Tom Holland as well helps us to understand is the reason why we've gone away from Christianity is for Christian-ish reasons.
Yes.
Because the church is not equal enough, compassionate enough, progressive enough, free enough.
Yeah.
And we're sort of hurling Bible verses back at the church. We've just forgotten the references.
I think also, so I think Tom is right in that, but we're not Christian enough in the sense that we stop sharing the core values of Christianity. It's swirling around in the West, but people outside of the West, people who haven't been introduced to Christianity, are somewhere else. They're far away. And I know there's been a lot of effort to seed Christianity in different parts of the world. But those attempts at doing that have been condemned as colonial, imperial. And so now you have Western Christians who are inhibited by that. They don't want to be colonial. And so it all stays within the perimeters of, or within the borders of Christianity. Then you have people coming from those parts of the world coming into the West, and they're told, you can share the products of Christianity, the peace, the prosperity, I mean, all the way down to the gadgets. But the ideas itself, to share that, is to be condescending, it's to be Eurocentric, it's to be racist,
yes,
and so on.
And to be un-Christ-like in that sense, right?
To be un-Christ-like, yeah.
But to be colonial is to use your power to dominate rather than to serve, and shouldn't we all be more Christ-like is actually anonymously kind of the criticism.
Yeah. So I see where Tom sees this going around in circles where you're trying to please, you're trying to, be, trying to do good, trying to do right, what's right. And yet you can't, because you've been told, you can't. Sharing the message of Jesus Christ is the message of Paul. Even the message of Tom Holland now is sharing that of the patriarchy and of white male superior. It's just, so you allow all of this, the warping, the disfiguring of the message itself to seep into you, because you're not inoculated against this, because you really haven't been taught properly. So they don't know what to say in return.
Yes.
Young people have not. I was reading recently that up until the 1950s, there was a Bible in everyone's home in America. And now it's nowhere to be found, or not in every home. And so what happens to those, which is now we're talking about at least 3 generations, who've had a watered down and then an even more diluted, all the way to members of Gen Z who may never have been acquainted with anything that has to do with Christianity. So how do they defend their legacy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the seed sowing, therefore, that we must do needs to be quite particularly Christian, doesn't it? It needs to be quite particularly, here's the Jesus Christ of the Bible.
Yes, and you have to be brave about it, and you don't have to be bothered by your skin color and your gender and all of these, in my view, irrational attempts at trying to snuff out the Christian roots of Western civilization. If you snuff out the Christian roots of Western civilization, you're left with nothing. Yeah. It's like this beautiful house, and it's going to crumble at some point and come apart. And I think you have to keep on, I love the word restoration, is to keep restoring what is good and what's true and what's beautiful and what's real. And do it for the next generation. So that then they can pass it on, otherwise we fail.
At Speak Life, we try to see all things through the lens of Jesus. And if you like this kind of content, why don't you subscribe to the channel? And there's plenty more where this came from. And if you want to go deeper with the Christian story, we've got a great course for you. It's called 321. You can go to 321course.com. You start an account with us, and there are 8 videos that you can do. There's a chat community you can get involved with, and plenty of bonus content. We'd love to see you at 321course.com. It's a deep, thoughtful way of seeing life again with Jesus at the center. So if that thesis is correct, that Western civilization is this cut flower, we need the seed of the Word of God.
Yes.
I think we need something like a Christian revival, wouldn't you say?
I would say that, and I think that, again, you've got to do it without, do it with humility, but do it without this constricting self-doubt that we've been going through. Yeah. I say that because we don't have time. Again, we are now entering. I was shocked by the young woman on TikTok who announced that she had found the truth in the letter that Osama bin Laden had written to America.
That went viral, yeah.
That went viral.
TikToker, yeah.
When I say we failed, I mean we failed her, and we failed her followers. Because for her to reach that conclusion, it's a testimony of the institutions of education, it's the testimony of the institutions of faith, the churches. It means we've basically abandoned these young people.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as in any way being a pioneer of this kind of thing? You've long been a kind of a cultural influencer. I guess since October, November of last year, you've started to be a spiritual influencer. How does that sit with you?
No, I don't. I actually don't see myself as any of those things. I see myself as someone who came from a world that is tribal and dark, and a world that was torn apart by violence, by prejudice. In my lifetime, there was the Rwanda genocide. When I came to the Netherlands, I was in an asylum seeker center with people from Sierra Leone that had completely broken apart, Liberia, the former Yugoslavia, Iran, Iraq. Look, that's what the world is, and war and tribalism and disease, these are things that we all care about and we want to stop. And having come to the West, I thought, and I saw and I experienced that Western countries that were prosperous had the right formula. And at first I was naive and I thought you could just take the formula, the model, and transplant it anywhere in the world. And it's going to lead to the same outcomes.
Yes. You and U.S. foreign policy, you both had the same idea. Just transplant Western liberal democracy wherever it will just take root.
Well, I think about, in terms of policy issues, the issue of immigration. There are millions of people who want to come here. They want to come to the West. And so many of my, colleagues when I was in politics, in the policy sphere, it is, let's do, our foreign policy, our military policy, our foreign aid policy. We only speak in terms of material things. And I remember back in the Netherlands, there was a Minister of Development Aid, and he was called Jan Pronk. And before I went into politics, before I was anyone, I remember just thinking, stop giving us money and material stuff. Just give us the values. Tell us, where all this came from. And maybe we can apply that. And I didn't realize at the time that I was saying, give us Christian values. But of course, over time now, I realize that. And I think if you give people the core values, so conflict is one of the biggest problems. We talked about human nature. It's embedded in human nature. You look at the model for conflict resolution that Islam provides, it doesn't work. It just leads to more conflict. That I think Confucianism provides, doesn't work. Buddhism doesn't work. And then you get to the non-religious, the socialisms and the communism. It is just one big conflict. It's pure nihilism. And so why not admit that there really is a way to understand human nature? Even if you call yourself an atheist, I don't care what you call yourself, just the empirical acknowledgement that the message that Jesus gave of humility, turn the other cheek, that actually works. Those teachings work. And if human beings find themselves in a state of less conflict, it's not that conflict is going to disappear, but it's channeled towards other things, then they at least have enough time to build something. And then when you get to the next point of teaching about collaboration and about the addressing of human pride, those things are very, very helpful. Those are the ingredients that you need for people to internalize the self-loathing, the self-hatred, the shame. Okay, God has created us in his own image and loves us all. And this profession of complete and unconditional love for you as a human being, that's a very, very powerful message. I've never heard it anywhere else. I didn't know, growing up, I don't think I understood the word love because it was always conditional. It's either the clan or the faith or and you'll always be punished unless you do this or the other. But the concept that you're loved anyway, whether you do right or wrong, that's a very powerful. Do not kill. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. These are, they sound quaint and sentimental, but they're very, very, very powerful and very meaningful things if people actually internalize them. And it is the best introduction to human nature. Much better than psychology books.
Well, you mentioned conflict resolution, and I mean, the Christian gospel is basically conflict resolution, if we're disconnected from the life of heaven, what does heaven do in response? Well, Christ comes and ultimately turns the other cheek to us. We strike him, we strike him on the cross. He rises up again and turns the other cheek and says, "Peace. Do you still want me?" And therefore, it's not simply a value. It's a story that we inhabit, and it's a God who has loved us first and who has absorbed the conflict in himself first in order to bring us peace. And I think as we internalize the story, I think then the values come out.
And when you internalize the story and you understand that you can't attain it, that you're only human and that you keep failing, that it's okay, try again, I think that's even more powerful. And you keep at it. So I'll give you an example of, I go to church every Sunday. What occurs in church? You pray and you praise God and you sing, the hymns of praise, and there's a collection, the charity aspect of it. Now, some people find that incomprehensible, and to be honest with you, in the beginning, of course, I didn't understand any of it or very little of it. But now I'm getting more and more of it and finding it very beautiful and peaceful and rewarding. But at the end of the service, we have coffee, we have tea, a few bites here and there, and then you have the community that starts to get together, and that's how you know what's going on in your neighbor's house, what's on with you. They know what's going on in our house, and we know what's going on with them. And that sense of community, that exercise of doing it on a weekly basis, that gives you, I think, the remedy you are seeking now for all these atomization that's going on. These individuals who are lost in social media, who are broken, and who you really need to bring back or advertise why the church is a better place to go.
So what would you say to people? Because there are so many people, as you say, there are just generation after generation. It used to be grandma that went to church, and now it's maybe great-grandma who went to church. But Ayaan started going, and Ayaan found it baffling and bewildering to begin with. And someone is thinking to themselves, I'm not sure what I'll find on a Sunday. I'm not sure I believe any of the mumbo-jumbo of the creeds. What advice would you give to somebody?
I would say just sit through it. The sounds are beautiful. Not all churches are the same. I attended churches that were ranting on about Trump, and I didn't go again. So find a church where the vicar or the pastor or the bishop is actually true to the teachings of Christianity, not distracted by politics and by the things that are going on around them today. And that's the community. Find a community you want to be a part of, and then become a part of it. And of course, I understand. In the beginning, you go and sit in the back and think, "What the heck is going on?"
But then, what then happens? I've got a friend, Paul van der Klee, who's also a YouTuber. He says, if you want to believe something, find a group of people who believe it and join them. But there is something about plausibility structures, isn't there? And there's something about communal, embodied, paying attention to something that actually awakens you to something that's already there. Is that been part of your experience?
My experience is my awakening, spiritual awakening, was preceded by suffering, depression, just really mental agony. And that's unfortunately what led me to my spiritual awakening. But maybe what led me to the mental depression was the shutting off of spirituality and the declaration that I'm an atheist, I can do all things by myself. Maybe that's, I don't know, you can say, was it the egg or the chicken that came first? But right now, I think that for me, it's the mental suffering that took me to a place of humility and this spiritual awakening. And after I've experienced it, and I'm still experiencing it, it is an awareness. My life is changed, it's transformed. I can only share that. I can't say, some people have all sorts of wonderful, magnificent things that they talk about, lights and dreams and visions, and I didn't have any of that. I don't think I would be credible if I said any of that, because I didn't. But what goes on, I had these thoughts, these incessant, constant thoughts. My head was constantly full of these ideas, worries. I was terrified of things. And tried to treat that with medicine, with consulting therapists and psychiatrists, with alcohol, and none of it worked. And simple, basic prayer and surrender worked. And so I pray every day. I pray in the morning and I pray at night. And I'm at peace, and those awful thoughts are gone. My head is clear, I'm more productive, I'm a better person. That for me is all the evidence I need.
That's a beautiful picture. You used the word surrender.
Yeah.
Growing up within Islam, in which submission is, the name of the game.
Yeah.
How is Christian surrender different to, or similar to, Islamic submission?
Islamic submission presents you with a manual of do's and don'ts. And that's what you are supposed to surrender to. And if your own conscience conflicts with the manual, you have to surrender, which makes it into a power play. It's about power. And the way I experience Christian submission, it's a submission to love, to God's unconditional love, and stop resisting that. And the whole humility of, I can't do it, I couldn't get rid of these thoughts myself. And the surrender is, help me, God, please get rid of them. Yes. And that's a completely different concept. Yes. The concept of love is the very opposite of the concept of power. Muhammad was all about power, especially in his years in Medina and afterwards. And the reason why Islam continues to be a problem is because at its heart it's about power, it's submission to the will of the strongest. Yeah. So when the Imam in Iran, Ayatollah, when he got political power, which is what Islam seeks, he called himself the supreme leader. I don't think that there is any Christian nation or any kind of political entity that is founded on a human being calling himself the supreme leader. That's the key difference. Now, I really want to make it clear that most Muslims are actually just like you and me. They're peaceful people. They want to get on with their lives. And many of them are horrified and resist the actions of fellow Muslims who draw on Muhammad and the Quran to do terrible things. The one thing they haven't done, which is the challenge, and again, here's where the two religions are really different, is if you are a Christian, like Martin Luther during the Reformation, and you disagree with what the church is teaching and you find that it is ungodly, you stand up to that and you hark back to the roots. You go back to the message of Jesus. You say, I'm not going to have the church read the Bible for me. I'm going to read the Bible directly. We're going to democratize this thing. When you do that with Islam and you go straight to the scriptures, you find something different. And so Muslim leadership today, who resist the radical Islamists, the violent Islamists, they also resist going back to the core because they don't like what they see there. But they haven't come up with a different formula for remaining Muslim and remaining peaceful. And it all has to do with the submission aspect of it. What are you submitting to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And as we go back to the source, the God who is love within the Christian scriptures. You know, if God is a father loving his son in the joy of the spirits, you've got a very different doctrine of God from a monad who is by himself, Allah, who has no partners, and to have a partner is to commit the worst kind of blasphemy of shirk. Yeah. And therefore, I mean, I'm a big fan of getting the doctrine of the Trinity out there and sort of saying God is Father, Son, and Spirit bound together in love. Therefore, love is primary. Yeah. Therefore, we're stuck and we need that help, and you've experienced that help at your lowest, ebb, and we're actually intended for a oneness with Jesus. We're actually intended for friendship with God. We're actually, not to submit as a slave, but to be a child of a father, which is an incredible privilege, isn't it?
Which is an incredible privilege, and if you then take the story to its next level, who sent his own son and sacrificed, and that's the expression of his love and the extent of his love, and it's boundless, and it's limitless, and that, I think, is a totally different story from the submission of the do's and the don'ts, the halal and haram, that which is permitted and that which is forbidden. And then if you take that to its logical end, it is some of what, these obligations that you submit, if you're a man, if you're a Muslim man, the Muslim Brotherhood says it is your destiny to die for the sake of Allah, converting others to Islam. If you are able to persuade people to come to Islam and they really take you up on that, that's fine. But if they don't, you are to do it by hook or by crook, and you are to do it by force. And that can't possibly be. It can't be. I mean, that's an act of power. That's
not an invitation at that point.
Yeah. And that is justified with the reward in life after death. And life after death, as a Muslim, what awaits you is a lot of material pleasures that you are not allowed to have on earth. And so to enjoy any of the material worldly pleasures, you're to forgo that. You'll enjoy them later on, but first you have to die and kill. And that reduces it to a death cult. And I think that is some of the big problems that face Muslims, peaceful Muslims. Like, what do they do with the concept of the hereafter? What do they do with the concept of the moral framework that Muhammad left behind, his own biography? What do they do with that? How do they live with that? That's a problem for Muslims. Sharia law, I mean, either you apply it and you're a good Muslim and you're causing all of these horrors, or you refuse to apply it and you live in a state of mental dissonance. And it goes on. There's another concept called commanding right and forbidding wrong, which means you have to constantly tell your fellow Muslims to stay within, the halal and the haram, the permitted and the forbidden. I mean, how can you be a good Muslim and carry on pestering people? So these are big. I wrote that book, Heretic. Islam needs a reformation, and it needs it right now. These are big questions and big challenges facing Muslims, good Muslims.
Well, exactly. I very much appreciated your Heretic book and saying that there is not an equivalent issue for Islam to get back to its sources as for Christianity to get back to its sources.
So reform in Islam would mean a modification.
Right.
Whereas reform in Christianity means get back to the roots.
Back to the roots and keep spreading those seeds. Ayaan, you've been so generous with your time. How can people keep up with you online?
Restoration. Go to my Substack, Restoration Bulletin, and I try to, put my ideas out there.
And there's the AHA Foundation.
Yes, the AHA Foundation. That is the 501c3. That's the charitable foundation.
Yes.
And
there's a YouTube channel, right?
There is no YouTube channel yet. Okay. We're working on all of those things. We're working on. So we've sent out on the Restoration platform 2 podcasts. We're working on more. Restoration Substack. Please subscribe. Follow me on Twitter.
There you go.
I don't know. I haven't quite submitted to the social media, Instagram and so on.
That's fine. You didn't call it X, so that's the right thing. You called it Twitter by its true and proper name, so that's absolutely right.
I love Elon Musk, so I will call it. I'll call it X. If that's
There's just been
bombshell
after bombshell in this conversation.
If he wants to call it X, we'll call it X. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Yeah.